Hey, I have a great little watercolor for you today. Again, working with simple shapes, circles and cylinders to create a composition of an apple, a lime, and a banana. So I'm going to do a quick sketch, get the basic apple shape, get the lime shape, get a little bit of the shading indicated on it, and a little bit of the detail. Trying to develop some depth and overlapping into this composition, and working in the banana shape, which is essentially some sort of a modified cylinder. It's got some planes on it with that edge right there. So adding in just enough of the detail that I would like to see. I do find and have seen that a little tighter drawing at this stage for a beginner oftentimes helps with the color application. Gives a beginner a little more structure to work with from the start. We'll wrap up that sketch, and then we'll start using three colors again. Only three colors in this: red, yellow, and blue, to mix up the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. So I'm mixing up right now a neutral gray background, bluish gray background, using all three colors to get to that neutral. Dropping in the saturated color up at the top, pulling it down. It'll be a little warmer and a little cooler, and then lighter as we come down onto the surface of the table. So just doing the color blocking. Background first. This is wet on dry, and we are using a Strathmore paper on this piece. So it's again a little better tooth to it than the Canson paper. Takes a little longer to dry, but that's okay. I'm going to do an underpainting of yellow on all three objects, on the lime, the apple, and the banana. Get that initial base color down underneath. Protect a little highlight if there is any, but we can always deal with highlights later. And now I'm going to start adding a little more saturated color, specific local color onto each one of the objects. Maybe some of that red orange and orange colors going onto the banana, into the shadow areas. Working on creating our green. The banana is a little bit of a green banana up at the top, so I'm going to drop in some of those greens. I'm using ultramarine and that primary red and primary yellow. And again, just dropping in, getting everything blocked in a general sense. No detail at this point. Popping in a little more contrast. Using that dark around the edges, feathering it out, bringing it around, creating those circles into spheres. It has dried. Now I'm beginning that next stage, secondary stage, adding in more saturation, thicker colors. Finding those shapes, developing that form, intensifying color. A little red violet for some of the shadows, transitioning into a blue violet. Working up a little bit of the structure of the edge of the table with that gray line. It's still pretty wet, so any of the colors I'm dropping in, they're kind of fluid. You can kind of see a bit of that that bloom on the bottom of the apple where the shadow touched the wet red-orange. Again, intensifying that green part of the green banana. Finding that shadow, that's actually a shadow along that edge. Have two different bananas right there. With a third on the far right going behind both. Introducing a muddy red, so a little bit of that blue violet, and then mixing in some red. So it's a neutral color with a warmth to it along the edge of that crease on the banana. And now it's that contrast that's starting to define and develop the form and causing the shapes to pop from one another. All right, it's dried again. Now I'm coming in with some really intense reds. And I'm going to start working with the stroking, creating a sense of texture on the surface as well. So I've moved over to a smaller brush and trying to get that surface quality, that striation that you see on apples. So it's a very complex series of glazes, starting with that lighter yellow. Where the shadow is, I introduced that violet on the side up there where the darkest part of the shadow is. And again, these are essentially spheres, so you have to think of the modeling and the structure of how light transforms and moves across the surface of a sphere. So you got the core of the shadow, you got the basic shade, the shadow, core of the shadow, cast shadow, highlight, all those components to give the illusion. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're just creating the illusion of depth and form. Mixed up a much thicker, dark, brownish shade there. I'm drawing now. I'm coming in. Like I said, I always tend to run home to mama with some drawing just to add that contrast, that pop. And then if I have to, I can always come in and loosen it up so it's not quite so sharp, but I am popping that in there just for the structure and for the contrast. And now things are really starting to emerge and developing a character from one another. It's the contrast, light against dark, warm against cool. That's what really kind of brings the whole piece together and starts making everything look good. I'm going to kind of quit blocking here before long, and I'll start working more with textural marks. And again, if anything's too sharp, I just come back in with some wet water, clear water, and soften the edges, feather things out. Yeah, now I'm starting to work with some of that textural marks, surface of the lime. You can see I have a fairly full range of color that's coming together on this. Unlike the four oranges, we have a red object, we have our green object, and we have the yellow objects in there. And each one of its colors will influence onto the other object. Some of that red will be casting onto the surface of the banana and even onto the lime, and the lime will cast green onto the apple and onto the banana. Texture marks again. Intensifying the shadow. I'm losing the edge down there where I had painted a line. I kind of removed it. Throwing some of that red into the end of the banana. So the color's pretty fugitive. It flows everywhere. You'll find a little bit of that color everywhere on every object. And so now, this is where you spend, after you've done all the blocking, getting colors just right in a general sense. Now I'm coming in, picking out highlights, looking for the detail. Working up the form a little better. And this is a wet on dry, so it's a lifting process. I'm taking pigment off of the paper with just a damp brush, creating that sense of texture, that rough surface of the lime, finding edges, lifting highlights. And I'll just bounce around, continue to do that. Intensifying the streaks on the surface of the apple. And again, this is just a small study, something to practice. You know, it's as you're learning to develop those understandings of the states of watercolor, the various stages, how and when to paint what thickness of paint to get that level of detail that you want. And don't think you have to paint exactly how I do. It's ultimately going to come down to a preference that you want to do. You know, who are your watercolor heroes that you're watching and looking at, maybe out on Pinterest or on Instagram? There's a lot of really good watercolor artists out there, and they all have a slightly different take on everything that I'm showing you with this simple little study, this still life study of fruit. It's still working on the shadows. Depending on the light source, you have to kind of watch shadows. So I'm adding some texture, some splatters for texture. On the bottom end of that banana. Still working on the texture of the lime. And really a lot more contrast right on that shadow side of that. It's a dark green. Making irregular marks. Trying not to be too repetitive in the type of mark whenever you're doing something in a natural sense. So the more random you make it, it's always a phrase I work with my students. It's an intentional, unintentional mark. And there's a number of ways of doing that if you're just painting with a brush, but those splatters are the best unintentional mark, where it will go wherever it goes and it creates a lovely texture. And it's that type of texture you actually see on the surface of an apple or a banana or on a lime. Okay, now I'm popping in some pro white, some opaque white back onto the highlights in a textural manner, making edges pop. Intensifying highlights. Yeah, just adding a few more splatters of white, refining everything. Continuing to bounce around, wrapping up this piece. So have fun with some simple shapes, some limited colors, and practice these little still lifes until you feel really comfortable with your skills. And then you can tackle the bigger projects. Hey, if you like this video, let me know. So give me a like, give me a subscribe, drop me some comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.